Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of a slice of history with the Butterfly Princess. This week I'm reading you another article from the February 2025 edition of the BBC History magazine. This article is entitled England's Forgotten Hero. When the 100-Year War was reaching a climax, one man was fighting tenaciously to secure the English claim to the French crown. So why, asked Joanna at Arman, is Henry V's formidable brother John, Duke of Bedford, not better known? And Joanna Arman is a historian and author, and she's the author of this article. As black skies faded to grey and dawn broke on that fateful day in the early 15th century, an English army gazed across the field in northern France. What their eyes encountered was a vastly superior force, about some 1,500 French-led troops squared back. Their numbers nearly doubled those of England's men at arms and archers. The English had faced seemingly inscrutable odds before it emerged victorious. But could they really triumph over this well-armed force, boasted by fearsome international allies? The 100 Years' War had been raging for close to a century already, with negotiations between England and France coming and going, but ultimately falling to decisively end the conflict. The balance of military sources had swung one way and then the other in clashes on land and occasionally at sea. Many confrontiers had ended with English longbowmen proving decisive, but as morning ebbed and the afternoon rolled on, the outcome remained uncertain. Finally, battle commenced, and the English won a great and memorable victory against the odds. Sounds familiar? No, this is not a description of the Battle of Agincourt, Henry V's famous victory of 1415, and there is a great film that depicts the Henry V's Battle of Agincourt. It is a film from 1989, and it's actually based on the Henry VIII play, and it stars Kenneth Branagh in the title role of Henry V, where he has that great battle at Agincourt. So if you want to know a bit more about that, I'd recommend you watch that film. It's a really great watch. Instead, it's the story of a clash fought on the 17th of August, 1424, nearly 9 years after Agincourt and 2 after Henry's death, outside the town of Vash in Normandy. Here the English army, led by Henry's younger brother, John, Duke of Bedford, hammered a combined force of French and Scottish soldiers, plus 2,000 Malice's heavy cavalry, killing perhaps 6,000 enemy troops while suffering minimal losses. Historians refer to the Battle of Vash as the Second Agincourt, yet that clash, like John himself, is largely forgotten today. Why has such an heroic victory faded from memory, and what part did John play in the tremendous period of English and French history? Born to battle. We'll return to the battle later, but to answer these questions, We must first turn the clock back 25 years. In 1399, Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Lancaster, best known today as Henry IV, usurped the English throne from his cousin Richard II. John was just 10 years old at the time, and as Henry's third son, would be unlikely to inherit the throne. Yet the young man quickly proved himself a highly capable leader during his father's turbulent reign. In 1403, aged just 14, John was made warden of the East March, the region on the Scottish border around Berwick-on-Tweed. But he soon proved his mettle defending England's northern borders against Scottish incursions alongside his older cousin Ralph Neville, Earl of Westmoreland. After his brother succeeded to the English throne as Henry V in 1413, John was trusted with the rule of England during his warlike siblings' many expeditions abroad, and was created Duke of Bedford in May 1414. The new king was closer to John than any of his other brothers, even Thomas, Duke of Clarence, who was next in line for the throne. Henry was absent from England for almost half of his 9-year reign and allowed Bedford to act as regent's Norfolk name during most of the time. John appears to have discharged his growing responsibilities, yet nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. In August 1422, Henry V died while on campaign in France, possibly from dysentery. England had lost its indomitable warrior king. It was a perilous moment, with the crown now passing to Henry's 9-month-old son. Nine-month-old son Henry VI, and England embroidered in war with the French. The nation urgently needed someone to shepherd him through the dangerous months ahead. Luckily, Henry V had realised that Bedford was up to the task and appointed his brother as Regent of France just before he died. For 13 years, Bedford effectively held together the English presence in the county. 10 months after his brother's death, John married Anne, sister of Philip, Duke of Burgundy. Unusually for medieval noblemen, created during his lifetime, survives in the Bedford Hours, a beautifully illustrated manuscript given by John to Anne as a wedding present and containing images of both him and his wife. It reveals that John bore a striking resemblance to his father and brother. Tall, with a break nose and dark hair, cutting a pudgying bow style. Style. A son's guerrilla at war. John's married to Anne, cemented England's alliance with the Duke of Burgundy, and the alliance was to grow even more crucial as relations between England and France continued to plumb the depths. In 1420, Henry V had been nominated as the heir of Charles VI of France by the terms of the Treaty of Troyes. This created a dual monarchy by which the kings of England were entitled to rule both England and France. The biggest losses from the Treaty of Troyes was Charles V's disinherited son, also called Charles, and in the early 1420s he waged a sort of guerrilla war against the English, boasted by aid from Scotland. It was the younger Charles' name that in 1424 the French court of outlaw, along with John Stuart, Earl of Buckingham, and Archibald Douglas, Earl of Douglas, joined battle with the English outside, which had been recently been taken by trickery. After brutal hand-to-hand fighting, English longbowmen and crossbowmen turned the course of the battle, and the French were routed. John then determinedly finished off the Scottish containment, reportedly crying out the name of Clarence as an act of vengeance for his brother, who had been killed 3 years earlier by a largely Scottish army at the Battle of Boulogne. John took seriously his promise to uphold his nephew Henry VI's claim to the French throne and continued to defend the English territories in France over the years that followed. The fortunes of his forces outskilled in the war, not helped by the ill-advised marriage of his younger brother Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, to Jacqueline of Helen, cousin of the Duke of Burgundy. This union threw the alliance with Burgundy into jeopardy as Humphrey clashed with the Duke, and John spent valuable time and effort building diplomatic bridges with England's long-standing ally. Then, in 1429, a French peasant girl called Joan arrived on the scene. John and Joan of Arc's paths crossed only a few times, and his relationship to the saintly French warrior is much misunderstood. In movies about Joan, John is typically cast as the villain, even the man responsible for her fate. In reality, the two never met, though Joan addressed 2 letters to him. You, Duke of Bedford, who call yourself Regent of France, make satisfaction to the kingdom of heaven, she demanded in one missive. Surrender to the maiden who has been sent here by God, the King of heaven. The keys of all the good towns that you have taken and violated in France. I am commander of war in whatever place I came upon your men in France. I will make them leave, whether they wish to or not, and then leave whether they wish to or not. And if they do not wish to obey, I will have them all killed. I have been sent here to drive you out of all of France. At first, John wasn't too troubled by Joan's decision. Within 5 months of her arrival on the scene, however, she had revived the siege of Orleans on the 17th of July. Had the younger Charles crowned King Charles VII of France in Reims Cathedral. By summer 1429, then John was worried and alive. Like most of the English contemporaries, he considered Joan a witch, and he wasn't going to allow her to threaten the dual monarchy. So he devised a plan to stop her in her tracks. First, he sent word to France, though he'd succeeded his father in 1422. His coronation hadn't yet taken place. Then, as his next gambit, he lured Joan and Charles to Paris, forcing them to spend time and resources in taking the capital instead of focusing on weak spots such as Orleans. John showed up Paris for a long siege that summer and set about winning hearts and minds. His plan worked remarkably well. When Joan arrived in August, she was forced to wait outside the city, failing her attempt to draw her enemies into open battle. Joan had learned from observation of Joan's previous engagements not to take the bait, preferring to fight her on his own terms. Following the siege, the French took the small suburb of Saint Geniers, but Paris itself eluded them. Eventually, in frustration, Joan of Arc appeared before the wall, screaming that all inside should surrender, or she threatened she would bring down the wrath of God upon them and kill everybody. The defenders of Paris were not impressed. An English soldier reportedly shot her with a crossbow, calling her a bloody tart. Joan had to be dragged away from the gate, bleeding and humiliated, and Charles's army withdrew from Paris. In 1430, Joan was captured, but John wasn't able to enjoy this moment. As Henry VI was now in France, the council didn't technically need a regent, and so it threatened to fire John. As a result, he spent much of that year in limbo, unable to do much politically or military. He did not play a role in determining Joan's fate. By then, she had been condemned for heresy, so the matter was left almost entirely in the hands of the church. John was not even present in Rouen on the 30th of May, 1431, when Joan was burned at the stake. Instead, he was bringing supplies to Paris, which continued to suffer frequent attacks. Their fortunes at that moment concentrated strictly, while the young woman who became France's poignant and enduring figurehead was being brutally executed in Rouen. Joan of Bedford was being greeted as a hero in Paris, yet the situation then was not as clear-cut as it may seem today. A family at war. Henry VI crossed the Channel to France in the summer of 1430, and for the next 18 months, rivalry simmered between John and various members of the council, especially his paternal uncle, Cardinal Beaufort, who was determined to assert his own supremacy. These tensions resulted in the regency being removed from John, and for a time, Henry's council took charge of the war effort in France. Yet John had always had a good relationship with the young king. He had been in England when his nephew was born in late 1421, while Henry V was away in France, and his campaign in France had been undertaken. He seems not only to preserve his brother's legacy, but also to advance the interests of the young English monarch. He must then have looked on with some satisfaction when on the 16th of December 1431, at the tender age of 10, Henry VI was crowned King of France at Notre Dame de Paris. The coronation proved something of a turning point for both Henry and John. The king would soon depart for England, never to set foot on French soil again. As for John, he was immediately reinstated as regent, reflecting overwhelming trust in his abilities. Even if some in the English court didn't want to admit it, he immediately set about reversing some of the policies Henry VI's council had put in place. The plague in Paris. Then, in 1432, John lost the love of his life and his greatest ally, his wife, and she was only in her late 20s, possibly succumbing to an outbreak of plague in Paris. Though John remarried the following year, he never produced any legitimate children. Anne's death proved the final nail in the coffin for the alliance between England and Burgundy, though John managed to hold it together for almost 3 more years. During this time, he had to return to England because he was the only person considered trustworthy enough to mediate between the rival factions forming in England in Henry VI's government. His brother Humphrey and uncle Cardinal Beaufort were at odds, not for the first time, and the division was tearing the government apart. John had another problem. The continuing conflict in France was becoming increasingly unpopular in England. In the words of medieval historian Jonathan Swift, John was the only statesman who truly understood the demands of dual monarchy and in the end truly believed in it. The belief was stretched to breaking points in the summer of 1435 at the Congress of Arras. This summit saw Charles VII and Philip, Duke of Burgundy, embarking on a series of negotiations that threatened to conclude with both of them rejecting English claims to the French throne. A young and healthy John, Duke of Bedford, might have better represented English interests at the summit, but John, who hosted the English delegation at the Congress, was not young and healthy. He was in his mid-40s, exhausted and on the edge of death. In fact, John died before the summit reached its end, breathing his last in Rouen Castle on the 14th of September 1435. 1 week later, Philip and Charles came to terms, ending the alliance between Burgundy and England that just had endured for almost 15 years. John was buried not in England but in Rouen Cathedral. Today, nothing remains of his tomb nor any other memorial, though England clung on to control of Normandy for 15 years after John's death. The nation had been deprived of its most loyal, capable and dedicated leader. After his demise, commitment to the war in France waned, and the divisions in Henry VI's government became increasingly violent. By 1453, England had lost almost all of its remaining French possessions. In death, as in life, John's reputation remained untarnished. The English would look back on the days of his regency as a golden age. He was even respected and admired in France. One cannot help but think that if he had lived longer, the course of Henry VI's reign might have run differently. Would the king's famous and beloved uncle have helped him to heal divisions, perhaps even persuading his nephew to go to France and fight? If John had produced a legitimate heir, would Henry have had a loyal cousin by his side when the House of York rose to challenge his throne? We can only guess at the answers to those conundrums, but we can at least remember and honour the value and loyalty of this long forgotten prince. And that now then concludes this week's edition of An Extra Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you can join me for next week's instalment. But until then, have a lovely rest of your week, and I will see you again very, very soon. Bye-bye for now.